Great games in the morning. This is Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for joining us. We are going to be discussing the concept of a world-building bonus round. I'm going to be doing these from time to time as an assistant for those of you that are storytellers and game masters in developing and exploring new ways to create adventures and exciting places for your participants and players to visit. In today's show, we're going to be talking about a system that I call Around the World in Around 80 Days or So. No, a world in around 80 days or so. There we go. The idea that it doesn't take a lot of time if you take concentrated effort and do some key bullet points, and then the amount of time that you take to flesh it out and develop it will give you room to grow as you're going, and your players will help you fill in the gaps. So I have a list of points we're going to cover on the board here, and I'll be adding additional detail as we go. So just realize we're going to be talking about a concept of hierarchy of scale. We're going to talk about forms of story seeds that can be planted right at the very beginning of the development. You've got some basic map details that we can work out right from the very beginning. The concept of establishing the activity triggers early on, so therefore they'll happen homogeneously and continuously as the story continues. The idea of your cast of characters in a broad brush way, so that you don't have to sweat all the detail work at the point when you need them. We'll also have an established bunker of rumors, gossip, and tales that we can pursue, as well as the SPCs, RPCs, and CPCs. Those of you who've seen my videos before know that I have an affinity for acronyms. So SPC, RPC, and CPC are my expansions of NPCs. And in particular, I start with the nudes, but I'm not going to start with the nudes today. We'll have to wait till later in the show. So watch for the nudes a little bit later in the show. We're also going to be talking about scaled up and scaled down sliders to make it so that your adventure can be more dynamic and the world can feel and appeal larger than it currently is while you take the time to develop. So shall we get started? Alrighty. So the idea of creating a world or an adventure can be really daunting, especially if you haven't done anything like it before and you're just picked up a player's handbook for a role-playing game and decided I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to buy the materials. I'm going to buy the Dungeon Master's Guide. I'm going to buy all the mechanical stuff I need to do this. But it's really scary and it's daunting, and I just don't know what to do. And I'm going to make it easy for you. So the first thing we have to talk about is the idea of scale. And while scale is something that we intrinsically understand, it's not something that we have a real affinity for the terminology, so we'll be talking about these in particular. The adventure that you're going to be running, it will be determined by what the gravity of the situation you're creating and what level of intensity you want to have, and more importantly, a sense of the scale of the activity. Is it going to affect a town? Is it going to affect a country, a continent, and so on? So the idea is to break down the scale of your creation before you even start to build any of it, and decide which part you want to focus on first. Because where you position yourself on this scale chart will give you an idea of the kind of magnitude of things you'll want to consider building for. So, for example, if you are building only for a local area, then you probably need the physical town they're in, what kind of locations are going to be nearby, and therefore you're only going to deal with the area. Whereas if you're going to do a region, you may have to do with 2 or 3 counties and maybe 2 or 3 different biospheres, and maybe there'll be several different monster ecologies you have to think about. Go up to nation, it compounds. Continent compounds even more, and develop the entire world. Well, that's the dream, but that's not where I recommend you start. Now, having an idea of the scale means that as you come up with inspiration, certainly plug in the parts where you think of. So, for example, you're telling a story of 2 travelers, and you mentioned the fact that one of them was a mercenary, and you say he worked for the Ajax Guards. Well, Where's Ajax? Well, is it an area, region, nation, continent, or world? Obviously, world, it could be the world, but the point is you pick which one of these it is from, and then you put the detail work, say, I need to build Ajax for that. That maybe it's a city, maybe that's a country, maybe that's a continent. Just decide where you want to pinpoint it, and literally, as the colloquial phrase goes, put a pin in it for that point in time. Now, by doing this, you can actually focus your attention on the part that you need right now while leaving your mind open to add in pieces as they come, because the creation process isn't an instantaneous thing. It's not all done at once, and it isn't all spontaneous. You might have to slog over it for a while, but the trick is that you just place the pins where you need to, add the information in, and recognize where you're on the scale so that you can stay focused on the one you're in particular looking at. So the next thing is to build in some limited story seeds. And when I say limited, the idea of an adventure, maybe in your mind's eye, you're thinking something monstrous or expansive like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. If you got these extremely expansive stories, they still have to start as The Hobbit does with one step out the door, right? You have to get the basis of the story going. But rather than defeat the purpose by making it too ominous at the beginning and putting too much weight on your players, create some limited story seeds. Like maybe there's an item someplace in the area, maybe there's a person that they might know. Think of the beginning of any heroic story, from Star Wars to Tom Sawyer. There's always a story arc of development, and you have to start someplace on that arc. So decide, if you're going to start at the beginning, then build the story seeds in. They don't have to be big. There should be 5 or 6 points, since you're going to have 5 or 6 players, that might be the anchor that the players will draw to. If you're going to do session zeros, which I recommend, and by the way, we do session zero chronicles at 9 p.m. So we just finished one. You want to catch that, you can check into that video a little bit later. It's here on the channel, and it's also at my YouTube channel, which is at NycosRPG. But the limited story seeds don't have to be anything really great, grossly detailed. They just have to be something that the players might put their teeth into. Having done that, let's talk about what those story seeds might be. As a matter of fact, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm not even lighting up my buttons here. I got buttons for a reason. So these could be, there we go. There's some ideas. Maybe it's some mysteries. Maybe it's the monsters in the area. Maybe there's some motives behind some of the NPCs in the area. By having these built in, you don't have to do the work as you go to find more things for the players to do. You simply have a list of limited story seeds. And as you are inspired to pursue them, fill in detail. As you're inspired to work on a specific mystery, maybe do some of the background work on that. But the idea is that by building in these limited story seeds, you establish a story that's literally bigger than the players. And that's critically important, because the players, although they want to feel gravely important, they also need to know that the world is moving around them. The next we have to look at is basic map details. And mapping can, for some people, be the biggest challenge, because many of us are not artists. We take one look at the really cool map work of other people and it blows the wind out of our sails. Just realize that a basic map detail isn't talking necessarily about the actual graphical map at all. As a matter of fact, all you need is a description, a direction, and distance. Yeah, there's a goblin cave. It's somewhere down that road, and it's about 8 miles. Oh, there's a border crossing into a foreign nation, and it's 60 miles up this road past old Farmer Brown's. These kind of simple basic map details help you start to organize where your relations are between things on the map. And later on, it'll become more clear that the details of what you need to know about movement and transit speeds and possibilities of transit types all will play into it, especially at the larger scales. But the basic idea here is just create a basic north is this, east is this, south is this, west is this. I notice I pointed all wrong for all of those. So it doesn't matter if you're traveling to the south and you know what's going to be down in that direction. Your players will have done so because they wanted to. They'll have a choice about it, and they'll therefore feel the agency of it. And giving them the opportunity to know where things are allows them to begin to orient. And this orientation process is really heady stuff, because when you get so that when you're describing something, your players immediately know what you're talking about and where you're talking about it and how far away it is and how many days. That's really really cool stuff, because now they're seeing your vision as the game master. And whether you're a story builder and you want to have an arc of information going through, you can utilize this same mechanic, simply because that way the players will have an idea of the direction they want to go, and you'll know perceptively what they're going to run into as they move in each direction. Having said that, there are certain things that are going to be built in that you're going to think of early on. You're going to go, gosh, I really want this specific event to happen. Or I know there happens to be a dragon up north and I'd love to have there be a dragon raid, but I don't want to put it too early in the campaign. How can I do this? How can I set this all up? Well, that's where we talk about activity triggers. And activity triggers are really the where, when, and what of the activity you have in mind. So if a dragon is coming, is he coming because he's angry? Is he coming because he's hungry? Is he coming because he's supposed to? Is he someone they're going to talk to? How coherent is he in his speech? And what's the possibility the players will be able to even comprehend what he's saying? These are all things you can think of, and as you start to write the triggers, you can write out when they learn Draconic, then the dragon shows. I mean, whatever mechanic you want to use. But the idea is that you build the activity triggers in as you're writing, well before you're ever going to use them. As they come to you, don't feel like you have to, because an activity trigger can be added literally at any point, given any reference to something that's going on in the story. So these are all, going back real quickly, these are all steps that you can do concurrently or consecutively, your choice. But to give you all of them, you can actually accomplish the goal of getting to a completed worldview or a table ready story in around 80 days or so from the very moment you decide to do it. So these activity triggers also will be something that can be spawned by player action in the extension. So as a player does something, they go to visit this next door village, then maybe there's going to be a combat challenge because somebody there didn't like the color of the clothing the player character wore or whatever. And so therefore there's going to be conflicts that are triggered by actions that didn't have anything to do with what the players specifically did. This is therefore really kind of a handy thing to add in after time, over time, to get your accomplished story. Next, we're going to talk about characters. And finally, we get to the nudes. I know people have been waiting. They've been going, he said that word really, really early on, and I had no context for what that would have to do with anything, and it sounded kind of crude. But no, that is non-essential window dressing. Sometimes there are people that walk through a scene in a movie, you don't know why they're there. There's an example I can think of in an old 80s movie where a guy goes by on in rainbow shorts and on a pair of quad roller skates. He just buzzes through the scene. You never see him again. He's got no effect on the story, but he does draw your attention for a few seconds. That's an example of a nude. He's a non-essential window dressing element, ornament, piece of action in the scene, so the players will feel the reality of the world. Realize that your non-essential window dressing can be as portentous as you want. You can have, people fleeing from a burning building are fundamentally nudes. This is not a new concept, but my new acronym is kind of fun and racy. So maybe it will get people commenting on the channel just simply because I was so bold, or not. This generation, who knows? Back in my day, this kind of stuff mattered. I'm sorry, get off my box. All right. So a cast of characters not only include the nudes, but they also include notables and NPCs. And I'm going to go into the particulars of them in a little bit later step, but just realize that your non-player characters, while they do need some development, don't take nearly as much to create as you might think. And we'll go more into that when we get to that subject. Notables, on the other hand, if you are going to be creating a governance system or a culture, you need to have an idea of who the leadership is for that, and whether or not they're active or passive or domineering or placating or whatever. By having an idea of who your governance is, you not only set up potential villains in the future, because who doesn't love hating a politician, right? Am I right? The the reality is that the notables also give the players a framework so that they can start to build their own story within. Like, for example, finding out that the miller's uh, wife happens to have three beautiful daughters and they're all eligible and they're looking for husbands might be of interest to your players that are looking for a romantic aspect of an RPG. And I know that there are going to be people that write me comments or might write me comments saying, how dare I suggest that in a role playing game? Well, I hate to tell you, but role playing goes a lot of different directions in the short and long term. So don't, what's the saying go? Uh, don't fight it if you don't know it, or whatever. I'll remember it in a minute. Anyway, getting myself off track. But anyway, yeah. Not there's anything in my life that equates to anything like that in an RPG ever. No. All right. So the next part we have to talk about is one of the greatest challenges as a player character, as a game master in a RPG, in the long term, is an idea of what the rumors are, gossip, and possible tales and legends of a local area when you're moving from one location to location as the story group moves. Well, guess what? If you've taken the time as you go here to build some rumors, gossips, and tales along the way, you'll have a pile of them that you can toss out to the player characters as tidbits in their scene work. So this includes I'm gonna sort of bastardize a quote by Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. He said that there's only three kinds of facts in the world: facts, statistics, and damn lies. Uh, the idea that what is going on in a town has been perceived by the 100 people or so that live there 100 different ways means that the number of rumors and bits of gossip and the actual tales of what might have happened are going to vary wildly. And so that gives you ammunition. So as you're building and you are writing about a certain NPC, maybe they have a story or two up their sleeve that you'd particularly like them to have. And then you just add them also to the overall rumor pool with a connecting name so that they actually have somebody to go into town to talk to about that specific rumor if they have gotten it someplace. By creating these interweaving threads of story and romance and rumor, you give the story more depth and more reality that the players can sink their teeth into and really enjoy and engage with. So this brings us to SPCs, RPCs, and CPCs. And the SPCs, RPCs, and CPCs will collectively count as your contacts, connections, and acquaintances. And I typed it wrong. Contacts, and more contacts. That works as well. The idea of a SPC is a story non-player character, and that's someone who is brought in specifically to carry information into the session so that the players have access to information so they can make decisions about pursuing a specific direction that you're trying to present for them. Story NPCs usually last in an area about as long as the story itself, and once the story drifts away, they may completely fall out. If they don't, then they actually are relegated to the next category, which is an RPC. And an RPC is a recurring player character, and that's somebody who is a non-player character, but they see him week over week and session after session. So if you're building a group in a community and they are renting a room at the inn, the innkeeper is a great example of an RPC. He may act as an SPC from time to time, but generally speaking, he's just simply always going to be there to make sure they pay their rent and that they've got clean blankets or whatever. Finally, CPCs are cast-off player characters, and these are, though random strangers, they're just a slight elevation above nudes in that they are not just window dressing, but perhaps they have access to maybe some of the scuttlebutt gossips, or maybe they've heard a story or two that they want to share. The idea of a CPC is just somebody who's there and then gone. Many times you'll have, even in a long-running campaign, you'll have CPCs as different stable owners might hire different stable boys from time to time, and therefore the very people that take care of your horses aren't always the same kids. So having a cast-off player character is some way you can cover those. Pardon me for taking a drink in the show. That was very unprofessional. Unprofessional. Especially since I brings everything any for the rest of the class. That's a usual complaint, is that if you don't have enough for everybody, shouldn't partake. But anyway, once you have your idea of the beginnings of your SPCs, RPCs, and CPCs, and granted, these are going to develop over time. The point here is that if you start now with endeavor to be done with this mechanism enough to play a game, you can do it in 80 days easy. Because you're going to take, just 2 or 3 days to come up with what scale, one afternoon maybe to come up with some basic story seeds. Your mapping outline might be a day, day and a half. Your activity triggers, that's going to be ongoing, so it's not necessarily all at once. Same with your cast of characters. And the cast here are specifically the notables. They will take some time, and you may spend a couple days on those. Your rumors, gossip, and tales, they're going to come endemically as you go. As you can come along in the process anyway. But just realize that as they form in your mind, get them put down, and then attach them to their scale, so you'll know where they fit into the overall story. And then finally, the last section I want to talk about beyond the SPCs and RPCs is the scale up or scale down slider. And that is the concept that when you're writing a story, you might be planning to work it so that it's only dealing with players in a specific community for one single adventure. By having the idea of it being placed in a nation, on a continent, within a world, means that after a time, the players might actually come back and say, hey, we'd like to pursue a story in that town we were visiting. We'd like to go back and reprise the village of Hamlet or whatever. And so by having scale up and scale down sliders, you can move from one theme of story to the other, up and down the scale. Things to remember in this case, when we're talking about sliders. Let's go ahead. I got way past myself. I didn't put up my other buttons on any of these. What is my problem? Yikes. I just talked through them all. Let me back up. Description, direction, distance. Yeah, I talked about that. Green, where, what, and when. Yes. Did I shut these all back off? I can't believe that. Blue tails. Yeah, I did. I had these all lit up and then I turned them all off. What the heck is wrong with me? Okay, and... Okay, so now we're just... Okay. This is talking about travel, transition, and tactics. This is what you're going to do to move people around within the scale of your world. Granted, if you're walking through an area, it can be listed in number of hours or maybe a day or two. Some nice camping outside is always great for some wandering monster encounters, am I right? But if you're going to travel to a city, perhaps that's several days or even a week or two away. And therefore you have to plan differently and figure out how you're going to travel. A singular group of people traveling across the country is ripe for raiding bands and highwaymen and such. So perhaps they're going to scale up and run with the wagon train. Or if they are going from the local level to the continental level, perhaps it's going to be a caravan core group or something. And these create different tactics and different techniques of role play. So having these scaled down sliders available for the story to move and sway as the players wish to go and that you want to take them becomes really useful now, especially on the scale down. By bringing them down, you need to have places for them to stay, which is, remember, you have to have basically a hostel or inn in every community, or at least someplace they can bunk. You've got to have places where they can get a hold of food or buy stuff at a general store. All these little basic things start to pop into your mind as you're thinking about your certain specific level, and then what the scale up would be or scale down might be. And so therefore having these, as you use I use the idea of the nesting cups for the scale hierarchy. The areas collectively are combined within the region. The regions are combined within the nation. The nation is combined within the continent. Of course, the continents make up the world. So having that kind of nesting concept when you work at your different stage sliders, you find ways to make it make sense for them to move from one form of play to another. So I have the next show is at 11 p.m. Pacific, which is Game Master's Soapbox. I've got a really fun show for you in store for tonight on that one. We're going to talk about bad guys. So definitely want to check back when we start at 11 for that. And don't forget that on Saturdays, we are running the live RPG experiment, and I'm still providing free copies, PDF copies of the NycosRPG rule system, the complete Dark Shards system book, for free if you play through one of the Saturday sessions. So join us at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, and we play until roughly 11, sometimes a little bit longer. And if you stay with us the entire time, you earn yourself a copy of the NycosRPG system book as a PDF. So I'm going to get out of here for another break, and I will be back in less than a half hour, as Inigo Montoya would say. Thank you very much for being here today. If you like what you see, make sure you subscribe and follow. And